Hi, everyone. Welcome to this evening's Art in the Spotlight, the posters of Will Munro. I'm Adrienne Connolly. I am the Programming and Outreach Librarian here at the AGO. And just before we start, I wanted to acknowledge that the Art Gallery of Ontario operates on land that's the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. And this territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which is an agreement between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and the Anishinaabe Three Fires Confederacy to peaceably share and care for resources around the Great Lakes. And this area is also covered by a treaty between the federal government and the Mississaugas of the Credit. And I'm actually in Hamilton tonight, not in Toronto. So I want to acknowledge that that's the territory of the Erie, the Neutral, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Mississaugas of the Credit as well. And Hamilton's also covered by the Dish with One Spoon, as well as the Between the Lakes purchase of 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit. So before I introduce our speakers tonight, I just wanted to thank TD and the Ready Commitment, our lead sponsor for talks and performances, for generously supporting our talk this evening. So I'm super excited to be able to introduce Liss Jacob and Sarah Liss. Louis was born in Lima, Peru, and lives in Toronto, Ontario. He's an artist whose work destabilizes viewing conventions and invites collisions of meaning. He studied semiotics and philosophy at the University of Toronto. Since his participation in Documenta 12 and Kassel in 2007, he's achieved an international reputation and has exhibited widely in places like Montreal, New York, Bolzano, Taipei, Vienna, and Hamburg. And Sarah Lisz, who's a colleague of mine at the AGO, is a writer, editor, journalist, and sometime cultural critic living in Toronto. Her work has appeared in publications including New York, The Grid, The Walrus, Toronto Life, Maclean, Chatelaine, Hazlitt, and the Globe and Mail. And she's the author of Army of Lovers, a collective history of the late artist, activist, and community builder Will Munro, which was published by Coach House Books in 2013. And currently she is the editor of publications and exhibitions at the AGO. And just before I pass it over to Louis and Sarah, I just want to let everyone know, if you have questions, you can use the Q&A function, which is down, pointing down to that part of my screen. So you're welcome to type questions in throughout the talk. Louis and Sarah might address some of those questions during the talk, and we'll leave some time at the end to do a Q&A. So yeah, without further ado, Louis and Sarah are going to talk about Will Munro and the poster collection that we hold in the Edward P. Taylor Library and Archives at the AGO, where we have a full collection of Will's posters. So I will pass it over. Welcome.
Thanks, Adrienne.
Thank you so much, Adrienne. Thank you so much for being here, Louis. It's so nice to see you and your stripes. I just wanted to begin this talk before we kind of jump in by acknowledging the passing of someone who is incredibly important to kind of the world that Louis and I are about to jump into tonight. This weekend, we learned about the death of writer, poet, gadabout, and cultural critic R.M. Vaughan. Richard was hugely important to the Toronto art community as a critic and a creator and a participant and a larger than life personality. And he was specifically important to kind of the realm of Vaseline, which is one of the points in Will Munro's legacy that we are going to talk at length about tonight. And so it seemed sort of fitting to start this talk by reading a bit from a story that Richard Vaughan had written way back when about Vaseline in its heyday for Toronto Life magazine. And our hope is sort of that this will give you guys at home a sense of what Vaseline was like in the moment, or if you were lucky enough to have been there, it will perhaps twig your memory. So this is how R.M. Vaughan described Vaseline. Vaseline was a monthly music and performance event that in 6 years forever changed the Friday nights of a generation of Toronto artists and freaks. In its lewd, spontaneous, hysterical, and glamorous way, Vaseline defined a new Toronto aesthetic, a playful and endlessly inventive mode of presentation that encompassed everything from lesbian prog rock to trans camp to vintage punk revival to good old-fashioned loudmouth drag. We will talk more about some of the inner workings of Vaseline shortly, but that hopefully will give you a taste, and we are remembering RM Vaughan now. So I don't know, Louis, do you want to start by talking a bit about kind of your connection to Will and to his history?
Sure. Yeah, so here we have a slide of two publications about the work of Will Munro. So Sarah, you did this oral history project, An Army of Lovers, published by Coach House Books, and the Art Gallery of York University published the catalog on the right, History, Glamour, Magic. That's an important exhibition catalog of Will's work, and I wrote an essay for it. So it's just a little bit of like material for folks that are interested in Will to find out more about who he is. I first met Will in 1997, which seems like so many moons ago. I had stumbled into a little gallery space at King and Spadina called the Nora Vaughan Gallery. So it was an art gallery that OCAD University ran as an exhibition space for OCAD students. And I walked into the gallery, and Will was hosting an exhibition of his work. He had done a giant textile wall in the gallery made out of hand-stitched underwear that he had kind of quilted together to make this giant wall. And we started talking, and we soon became friends. So that's my first contact with him. And since then, of course, Will has exhibited quite widely at Paul Petro Gallery, at Art Metropole, in New York City at Deitch Projects and John Connolly Presents. Since he died, the Art Gallery of York University, the AGO, La Centrale in Montreal hosted exhibitions of his work. So he's quite an active person as an artist with his own work, as a volunteer and as an employee at oh my God, I just blanked out on the name of the social agency.
The LGBT Youth Line?
That's right, the Youth Hotline. For many, many years, providing support for LGBTQ youth, and also as a music promoter. So he organized many, many music events that we'll be talking about today, and some of the material culture that was generated around then. Sarah, how did you come across him?
I mean, truthfully, I think that I probably literally stumbled across him. I have very blurry but very fond memories of kind of nervously being dragged to a very early installment of Vaseline, the club night that Will ran and that I described briefly earlier in this talk, and being totally overwhelmed. I was very young. I think I was in my early 20s, and I felt just enraptured by this kind of vision of queer culture and queer nightlife and kind of interpollination between different groups that was happening in this very gross, sticky, tightly packed space. And from there, I was so intrigued by what he was doing as a party promoter and a kind of community builder, and as an artist, which I actually discovered his art through his being part of his events, which were a kind of art. And I, as a journalist, I wrote about him I made a point of trying to write about his events as often as possible so that I would have an excuse for going to his events, often for free. And I did not have much money. And I admired him hugely. He was a tremendous influence on kind of my understanding of myself as a queer person, on my understanding of how community can be created and shaped and cultivated. And I think later on, you know, as I kind of watched what he was able to do in Toronto and witnessed the way kind of the people around him came together when he was ill and after his death, I was just kind of, I was so taken by kind of the ways in which I was experiencing queer history happening, which I guess is my roundabout way of saying that these were some of the reasons that when I had the tremendous privilege of writing a book for Coach House, I decided that I wanted to try to document this experience in this time and this place and this person, which is how I ended up writing Army of Lovers, which is, as I like to call it, a community history of Will and his work and his legacy. And my goal with it was to reach out to many of the people, yourself included, Louis, who crossed paths with Will, who collaborated with Will, who had insights into kind of this world and his work and kind of the larger legacy of what he brought to the city. And I wanted to weave together those stories. And I guess that brings us to now. You know, not long ago, Adrienne actually, who introduced us, approached me, and she she asked if I would be interested in talking a bit about this archive of Will's posters that the Art Gallery of Ontario happens to have. And I had no idea that we had them, and I was hugely excited. You know, Louis, you mentioned the very, very important exhibition of Will's work that we saw the catalog for that earlier in this talk. And I distinctly remember my experience of walking into that show was that I was so amazed by it was exquisitely curated and there was just so much work there. But I think that one of the things that I was most struck by was just this wall of posters that surrounded us, and that was, you know, a living document of moments in time. And so it felt very exciting to be able to kind of dip through that work as a way of returning to talking about kind of the meaning of that time and kind of what actions can mean to people.
Mm-hmm. Maybe let's start talking about Vaseline, which was the first of a series of events, of monthly events that he organized. So in 2000, he started Vaseline, which is probably his most well-known event. I believe that this is the first flyer for Vaseline. So it started in 2000, first at the Almo Combo, so at the Spadina and College. And then I think it started in the downstairs of Almo Combo. It ran for a few months there, quickly became too jam-packed full of people. Then it moved upstairs to a larger space at the Almo. And once again, it grew too crowded. And then it had to move to Lee's Palace on Bloor Street, where it stayed for many, many years. I think altogether, Vaseline ran for, I think, 6 or 7 years. And if you can think of the scale of commitment required to do this, it's quite extraordinary. So it's a monthly event organized by Will as a very young person, doing a monthly event where he's bringing DJs, but also live music. That was very important to him. That Vaseline had like live performances by musicians. So here we have the Queens of Country Metal. I remember seeing the first Peaches performance, one of the early Vaselines, with Peaches in this kind of like bodysuit, this kind of hot pink bodysuit, and she had taken these pink tights and put, you know, those metal, those Benoit dolls, sorry, not dolls, balls that you use for like, so she had put 2 Benoit balls in the hosing and then tied it around her waist. So she had these 2 metal balls as she's performing. So she just seemed like such a powerful presence on stage. And that was the beginning of, you know, the Peaches that has become now an internationally known performer. And for each Vaseline, Will would produce a handmade poster to promote it. So what I remember of this flyer was, you know, it was like a small photocopy flyer, but I remember he had kind of dusted it with very light sparkles on it, so that even this kind of very cheap, very simple, very modest promotion had like an extra special magic to it. And very quickly, the posters became much, much more ambitious. They became like hand silk screened designs that he would poster around the city. And some survive, you know, because people would kind of tear them down from the streets before they got washed down by the rain or snow or whatever. So they become quite precious items now. But that was very much a belief in kind of the care and the dedication that he brought to these events. He could easily have just outsourced the printing of the posters. He could as easily have not done any posters at all and only promoted it online in social media. So, you know, 2000, this is kind of like the beginning of that era of the digitization of the promotion of events. So he could have taken that route, as so many people did. But for him, it was important to keep this handmade quality. It's aesthetically beautiful. But I remember him talking that it also conveyed a sense of care. You know, that if you would see a beautifully hand-printed poster on the street, you would notice it. And you would know that the person who's organizing this gave extra energy to this event. And that was an important thing for him to communicate to people, because he knew that if he put energy into making the posters, people would put their own energy if they attended the event. So often people came dressed up, you know, you would work on your outfit, you would work on your, it was an event, it was an occasion. And so people put a lot of themselves into it when they arrived. And that, I think, gave Vaseline such an energy that's unique and memorable. So that's just something to begin saying about the posters. Should we see the next image?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, you're talking about the way people would plan their outfits and it wasn't just kind of dressing up to go out. It was dressing up to make a statement. And earlier today, I was thinking about how it seems so appropriate that we're having this talk just in the days leading up to Halloween, which was always kind of like almost like a religious holiday at Vaseline. I mean, it was a moment when people would really go all out with their costumes. I mean, and in general, Halloween is a big deal. You know, I mean, not to generalize, but Halloween is a pretty big deal in the queer community. But the ways
heard
in which
it be referred to as queer Christmas.
Queer Christmas. But the ways in which, because the space of Vaseline was kind of a world where anything went, and the notion of kind of perversity and, you know, being your full self was celebrated. Taboos were kind of smashed. And so, you know, I remember one year, someone won the costume contest. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and I may be mistaken, and if someone out there remembers this differently, I believe that it was the musician Melissa McClelland, who's now in the country rock band White Horse, won for White Pant Period. That was, she got the grand prize. I remember probably in 2008 working for like a month before Vaseline to try to come up with the perfect JT Leroy costume. And then kind of the glee I felt every time someone like looked me up and down and then tried to figure out what I was. And then I would get to reveal the punchline that I was the real JT Leroy. But it was an event. And, you know, like you say with the posters, just the amount of care that went into even the most disposable kind of ephemeral promotion for Vaseline. These little artifacts were art. And so you would go and you would kind of put all of this energy into something that was destined to get completely destroyed within the night, but that was part of it. And, you know, of course, this kind of connects back to a larger history of, you know, New York party kid culture. It connects to drag culture, but it was just such a magical time and place.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and I see I'm very happy that my memory of White Pant Period has been validated. And thank you, Alex, for making me feel as though some parts of my memory have been retained from the past. And I mean, another kind of very kind of spiritual time at Vaseline was the Vaseline event that would happen every year during Pride. Although, you know, because Vaseline was a world that was very much about kind of queer liberation as opposed to corporate assimilation, Pride at Vaseline was all about shame. And it was about kind of owning your shame and celebrating your shame and then kind of letting go of the negative aspects of shame. And you can see in the slide that's up right now, it's a poster for the Nina Hagen installment of Vaseline during Pride Week. And this is another element of what kind of that moment in time was about for Will. You know, I remember I was a music critic at one of our local weeklies, you know, magazine, and I would have these kind of, you know, instant history lessons about artists that I knew about, but I didn't have kind of a profound understanding of their meaning and their work. And Nina Hagen was certainly one of those people. I remember she was absolutely terrifying on stage, but also just like kind of demanded reverence from everyone in attendance. Do you remember that night, Louis?
I do. And I remember what you were talking about in terms of shame, because Will was very much interested in a queer culture that still had its connection to the underground. He really was not interested in like the mainstreaming of queer culture, the corporatization of queer culture, the heteronormativity that can be an element in queer culture. He had zero interest in that. And so for him, even to organize Vaseline first in Chinatown and then in the annex, even just in terms of the geography of the city, it's quite far away from the neighborhood of Church and Wellesley. And not as an idea of disrespect to the Church and Wellesley neighborhood, but as an idea that queer culture can retain a kind of underground self-determination, that it can kind of create itself anywhere and has historically created itself anywhere. So even the geography of where to host the event, I think, carried this philosophy of his idea of queer culture. And I definitely remember Nina Hagen. I mean, I imagine that some viewers are familiar with Nina Hagen and some will not be. She's one of those like goddesses, I would say. You know, she's this German performance artist. She's trained as an opera singer, and then she became like a punk musician who has these incredible vocalizations because of her opera training. So during the 70s, she put out all these records mixing like punk and dance music and opera together. And she had a larger than life persona. She's just one of these incredible, incredible people. And so for Will to be able to bring Nina Hagen, this legendary figure, to Toronto, you know, here in the poster it says 2004, for Pride weekend, and to thematize the event as show your shame during Pride is, I think, part of that subversive thing that you're talking about, Sarah. But I remember Nina Hagen perform. I mean, by this point, she'd be quite in her years. I don't know exactly how old she would have been in 2004, but could easily be in her 60s. And so I really thought, okay, you know, we're here to pay homage to Nina Hagen. Of course, it was sold out. I mean, she's such a legendary figure. It was like packed at Liss Palace. And I thought, okay, we're going to see like a senior artist who everybody reveres, but she's going to be mellow. She's going to be, you know, what I imagine a 60-year-old performer on stage would be like. Well, she totally shattered that fantasy of mine. I remember she came in a plastic outfit that was like a nurse's outfit made out of like latex rubber. And she had her hair in these like big ponytails held up with these like little butterfly clips. So as she moved, these butterfly wings would like flutter around her head. And she was as punk as ever. I mean, she performed like for more than an hour. You know, it was like an hour and a half or something like that. This long performance. If she had done 2 songs, people would still have been like worshiping at her feet. And when she came on, it was obvious that she was sick. So she had a flu or a cold or something like that.
Coughing. Like I feel like
coughing, and she kept apologizing for it, like in this funny way. In the middle of the song, she would like hork. She'd basically like in the middle of singing, just like spit this gob of whatever and just keep going. And she had these like giant platform high heel boots. And, you know, she performed, obviously with a cold, but rather than like stop or cut the show early, she would just like lie down on her back on the stage if she got tired or her feet hurt, and she'd just keep going. And for me, that was like such a precious moment, because she was, I think, really teaching all of us who were younger than her in the audience what it means to be punk and what it means to be fierce, I think. So it was an amazing moment. And I think the poster design captures that amazing energy so beautifully. So soon Will started collaborating with Michael Como, another artist, who became the principal designer and printer of many of the classic Vaseline posters. So this definitely looks like one of Michael Como's designs. It just has this kind of distinctive style.
Yeah.
Can we see the next slide, Adrienne? Yeah, and this is another beautiful poster of the band Sean. So a much younger generation, but I think still carrying that spirit of like subversiveness and gender bending presence. So, you know, through the 6 or 7 years that Vaseline was on, the roster of performers is like a who's who of like this giant slice of queer culture. So we had Nina Hagen come to Toronto, the gossip.
The gossip multiple times. I
Yeah,
think.
the gossip multiple times. I mean, you know, and they were fierce, like such amazing performers. Jane County, this important figure in the trans music and culture. Limp Wrist, you know, one of like the classic kind of queer punk bands. Vaginal Cream Davis coming in from LA. She was amazing. I'll never forget her shrimping contest that she had on stage. Canberra Fowler, the performance artist from New York City.
The Need, I remember The Need. That was back at the Elmo.
Oh yeah, yeah. So
Cameras played. I remember there was one year when Will brought the hidden cameras. And it was still quite early on, and he brought them on Boxing Day, and it was like, you know, Boxing Day, everything in the city feels shut down, and then just the joy. And I think for so many people who had been kind of maybe, you know, trapped in very conventional family celebrations, then like kind of the relief and exhilaration of being able to come to Lee's Palace on Boxing Day and just kind of unleash themselves. The energy there was great. And I think the poster that we're looking at now was it was another installment of Shame. And it was from later on. So this would have been when the monthly Vaseline kind of had wound down, and Will had moved the events, like kind of more one-off events. This one was at Wrong Bar.
oh yeah.
But, you know, even that too was very, I think, you know, a conscious thing, certainly in terms of, you know, trying to gauge venue and crowd, but also in terms of the expansion of a queer neighborhood into West Queen West and into Parkdale, and into a space that was much more mixed, that had been kind of traditionally occupied by artists and by people across income brackets. And, you know, this was at a time when certainly the gentrification of Parkdale was well underway, but you know, Will, I think by that point had opened the Beaver, if I'm not mistaken.
Since this was at the Wrong Bar, he had probably wound down the monthly event at Lee's Palace and was doing more of these kind of pop-up events at the Wrong Bar. So yeah, that sounds right. And if you think about it, like, it's amazing because, so it started with Vaseline as a monthly event. You can imagine the logistics of having to book a band, get tickets for them, get hotels for them, promote the event, print the poster, deal with any, like, you know, hassles at customs at the airport or anything like that. And doing that every 4 weeks for years, right? And of course, him being like unstoppable, doing something this colossal wasn't enough. So soon enough, he started doing Peroxide, another event, a monthly event in Kensington Market, and Notio on College, and later Mustache that him and I did on Yonge Street. So soon enough, he was doing 4 of these monthly events every single month for years. So just I think that just conveys a bit of like the passion and the commitment that he had to the culture that can happen in these kinds of events, and the unique experience and just transformation that can happen between people in spaces like this. So this whole idea of like nighttime culture as culture.
And I'm just seeing we have a question. The question is, can we give a sense of how the events fit into his bigger art practice and how all the pieces fit together? And I think it's a good one. I mean, I think one of the things that I always marveled at in terms of the ways, you know, I come, part of my background is in music and kind of like music criticism, and the way that Will booked shows was informed by this kind of commitment to history and to ensuring kind of that you know, young punks knew about their elders, and that, and you know, specifically, and when I was going through old articles, I came upon a quote. You know, Will was very committed to, he had a real feminist ethic, and he wanted to ensure that he was kind of committing to booking female identified artists, kind of punk queens like Nina Hagen, queer icons like Carol Pope. And he said, you know, when he was making these flyers, he said, I wanted to put images of women and dyke icons on the posters and flyers. I wanted women to know instantly that this was their space as much as anybody else's. And I think, you know, it's been talked about at other times how kind of segregated by gender queer culture, you know, prior, well, you know, certainly in the 80s and into the 90s was, and trying, the experience of mixed events was still so novel, and especially mixed events that were so truly mixed, you know, that where you felt like there was a real kind of spectrum in terms of gender, but also in terms of age and in terms of class and in terms of kind of worlds that people occupied. Oh yes, Dave Munro, Will's brother, has clarified that the Wrong Bar event, which we're looking at the poster right now, came about after Will was snubbed by Lee's Palace, and this was the first show that he put on at Wrong Bar, and while he was sick. You know, in terms of his bigger art practice, I guess I would say that in terms of my understanding of Will's art practice, you know, certainly both a sense of history and connecting to queer history is, you know, you can see that in his art, in the ways in which he plays with iconography, and also this kind of idea of feminist practice and feminist art and craft are all kind of elements of it. But you know, I suspect Louis can probably talk much more eloquently about that than I am.
No, I totally agree with what you're saying. And I mean, you mentioned the kind of like the feminist aspect of all his work. You touched on the element of class and his belief in do-it-yourself culture, which is very much like I think has a political root in the idea that you can create culture with a poverty of means. You just work with what you have. And you can create a full, vibrant culture with very little. You don't need to kind of go corporate, so to speak. I very much agree with like, that's so much part of like his interest in like craft techniques, in hand sewing. You know, I talked about his student exhibition at the Norvon Gallery where he's hand sewed the underwear. Hand making underwear was a constant for him. Like that was an integral part of his practice. He made, you know, in the background here, I have this kind of virtual background of his last exhibition at Paul Petro's. And I don't know if people can see it, but it's kind of like I call it like a granny sex sling. So it's kind of like a sex sling that has this macrame little blanket on it. And I think, you know, and the macrame plant holders, this is another element of craft and kind of cheap culture, cheap material culture that he was very interested in, and the politics of that. I'll just read out a little thing that I wrote after he died. There was a big memorial exhibition of his work at the Gladstone Hotel. And I'll just read out a thing that I wrote for his memorial that I think captures some of these ideas that we're talking about. I said, Will was a culture junkie. He was a straight edge kid, so he never touched alcohol or drugs. But underground culture, especially queer underground culture, was his addiction, his source of inspiration. The food with which he fueled his limitless energy. He loved the freaks, people like Klaus Nomi and Lee Bowery, who through their example create new possibilities in life. He loved the survivors, people like David Wojnarowicz and Rubinsky, who show the world what it means to be fierce. He loved people whose gender was ambiguous. And he had a special admiration for the lesbian dynamos, people like Layla, Lex, and Cecilia, who would always stand by their people and got shit done. Will was proud to consider himself a lesbro. You know, I think that touches on so much of Sarah, what you've been talking about. And I think you can see a lot of these resonances in his artistic work. If we could just see the next slide. This is an image of a poster that was made for another one of his monthly events. So Will and I started doing this event called Mustache, hosted at Remington's, this gay strip bar on Yonge Street. This is, I guess, a kind of badly printed copy of it, but because it's kind of smudged. But it gives a flavor of just how handmade these things are. Like right now, we're seeing them on computer screens, and I'm glad we're doing that. But they also have this kind of amazingly, each one is unique, right? And I just remember like endless nights, you know, because to design this poster, it would like, it really is a labor of love, I have to say, because like you basically first have to like come up with a concept, then design it. So, you know, you're looking at this design for his 30th birthday. Well, we had to photocopy. So we had this book of all these fonts, and we had to photocopy whatever font we wanted to use, and then hand cut each letter and like also magnify it and shrink it to get the different sizes of the font, and then glue it, hand glue it, and kind of hope that it's all more or less symmetrical. And then this drawing was a beautiful logo that G-Stab, another artist, made for Mustache, which is just so beautiful with these two unicorns straddling this big mustache. Anyway, and then it would be like an all-night affair. Like it would be like from like 8 o'clock p.m. till 8 o'clock a.m. photocopying. So we would go to Punch Clock Studio, this silkscreen studio, I guess near Lisgar Street. Now it's all condos, but we'd go there overnight and just have like a lot of snacks and just like really roll up our sleeves and silkscreen, often multiple colors, right? So this one, it looks like it's a 3-color poster. Sometimes they'd be like 3 or 4 color posters. So 4 different stencils made so that when you overlap all the layers, you get the one image. And then we'd like talk all night about music, what's exciting us in music, what's exciting us in art. And it was always like a bit of a history lesson, like listening to Will talk. He would make connections between younger artists in the scene and older figures. He would connect different traditions. And for him, the events were, and even the graphic design in many ways, you know, this kind of leather mirror cap that refers to like gay men's leather culture in the 50s and the 70s. So there were always all these elements, even in the graphic design, that in a visual way, you know, this font refers to the 70s. It's very much a disco font. And he liked mixing these things that are supposed to be incompatible, right? The rock and roll kind of leather culture and the disco font shouldn't go together, but they do. And I think that's an element of this kind of belief in the richness of the culture and the cross connections that happen in different aesthetic trends that you might not think go together, but he very much saw them as part of the kind of continuum of underground culture. What a cute way to celebrate your birthday as well. Can we see the next slide? Just this kind of amazing photograph of Will in the middle of DJing, and he made this hat. So it looks like it's probably made out of like cardboard and like a plastic electrical tape that he's like taped it to make it look like it's a red plastic hat that refers to the band Devo. So this kind of like new wave post-punk band called Devo from the 80s. He made his own Devo hat for DJing this night. And you can kind of see his kind of chameleon-like style. Like he's like as interested in like punk music as he is in disco, as he is in like new wave. It's all part of this kind of non-normative culture that he so much treasured. Can we see the next slide? This is something that he made and he wore at Peroxide. So once again, Peroxide is another one of these monthly events that he did. Peroxide took place in the basement at 56 Kensington. So this kind of amazingly dingy basement in Kensington Market that was covered in like plastic ivies. The ceiling was all dripping with plastic ivies, very dark. And the DJ booth was placed on top of these two giant fish tanks that were lit with black light. And the music that he brought for that was new wave and electro, like new electro music from the 2000s, and kind of like older, that kind of cold mechanical new wave music. And to make this vest, he photocopied album covers. So you can see Gina X performance, you can see Giorgio Moroder, you can see Public Image Limited, Sig Sig Sputnik, Klaus Nomi's beautiful face. So he made this collage of album art of these kind of heroes, musical heroes. And he fashioned them into this wearable vest with this kind of Velcro button. And then he laminated it all in like a packing tape, just so that it wouldn't all fall apart immediately. And he wore this as his outfit for one of the Peroxide. So I remember him DJing wearing this. And you can imagine like this dark space lit only by like the black lights inside the fish tanks. And so this kind of graphic element of the vest would just like pop in this kind of electric way. So striking, and then he'd like spray paint this kind of edging and kind of neon pink spray paint. Such a classy dude, man. Like that's very, very classy. Anyway, but once again, to talk about kind of the connections between his art, this dimension of do-it-yourself culture, like this is made out of cheap materials, photocopy and tape and spray paint, right? This idea of wearable art as part of culture, right? That culture is not only the thing you see in museums, it's actually the thing you see like at night when you go hanging out with your friends. That's culture. The kind of historical... the historical dimension, referring to these bands. What were you going to say, Sarah?
Oh, no, I was going to say, I mean, we had discussed as well, and this is reminding me of it just because of the way you're talking about, assembling this vest. So much of, I mean, this moment in time that we're kind of traveling back to right now is totally on the cusp of, the social media world we live in now. This kind of, digital virtual world where there is so much art being produced in various ways and kind of instantly shared between people. But so much of what was happening for these events, in the making of the events and in the promotion of the events was so wholly analog. And there was an element of that analog culture that was so deeply rooted in care, whether it is about, assembling a vest out of photocopying and then spray painting and kind of laminating it and putting it together, or sitting in punch clock all night and hand screening posters and, and putting that energy into art that is, inevitably going to get torn up or washed down or papered over. Even at the same time, putting energy into, more formal art shows. And I think that there's something really amazing when you think about that, when you think about kind of, there was such a blur between high art and low art, and in a way that kind of nudges it outside of, kind of true capitalism, even though, obviously there's a whole capitalist drive, because you have to pay artists to come to your events. You have to book spaces. You have to, like, all of this exists within a system. But I think that there's something so special about this moment in time in terms of the ways in which people were connecting and communicating and making art.
In terms of analog culture in this digital moment. Is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, but I'm glad you're picking up on his entrepreneurial spirit. Like, I do think I wouldn't say he was a capitalist, because obviously, like, everything is as much a labor of love as it is for anything else. But he's definitely an entrepreneur. I mean, he's definitely like a mover and a shaker. And I think he was proud to be able to make his art, including these events, sustain his life. He didn't have to work at a job that he hated. He managed to kind of turn his passion and his love, and he structured it in a way that did pay his bills and did pay his rent, as well as pay all the performers and the DJs that he's working with. So I think there's a politics to be discerned there around making a long-term economic structure that can support this kind of alternative culture. I think that's an aspect that maybe we're shy to talk about in connection to like queerness or punk or whatever, but I think it's a real thing, and I think it's something worth talking about. I see on the chat there's someone that had asked who designed the poster. I think that meant the previous poster, the mustache poster.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was designed by Will and me. So I think most of the mustache posters are designed either by the two of us together, or sometimes we just take turns. Can we see the next image? Here's a poster that he designed for one of his No-TO, which was like his kind of post-punk event at Timeless on College, this reggae bar that he started doing another monthly event. So this beautiful, I mean, this is just such a classic design. I mean, it's just so beautiful.
Oh, yes, this one is actually, it was at the Silver Dollar, but that makes sense.
Oh yeah, cool. And like, I don't know, to like appropriate this kind of tabloid design, this kind of like National Enquirer, whatever tabloid layout, but to have it kind of contain different content, it's so interesting. And, for people who are interested in kind of queer culture, these burning houses, this kind of stencil of the burning houses will immediately recall the work of David Wojnarowicz, the artist, the author. And in fact, there's a photograph of him in the center wearing this mask of Artaud that he made, and he wore it in the subway in New York. And then there's a picture of him as a child on the top of the design. So, and I think 3 Teens Kill 4 is the name of one of David Wojnarowicz's bands. So all of these kind of references are enfolded into this, the design for this poster. And, so this is like a 2-color design. So you design all the blue elements in one screen, and you design all the red elements in another. And then it's only when you overprint the two together does it become a unified image. So I just want people to kind of realize like the amount of forethought and planning and execution that is required to do these kinds of things. You really have to have an overall vision, or will have to have an overall vision for this to come about. And, to dedicate this amount of care and then just staple it and leave it on a post, on a pole on the street for anybody to see for the elements to kind of wash away, or for people to tear them down and collect them. It's such a, I don't know, such a beautiful, beautiful gesture. I think we have time maybe to talk about a couple of things, because it'd be nice to open it up for questions from viewers. But the next image takes us to one of the later events that he did. So this is a poster for Seventh Heaven, which was an event that he did with Jamie Sin, amazing DJ. And here they're bringing like Andy Butler from Hercules and Love Affair. Once again, like Nina Hagen, you know, another major figure, like coming to DJ at Seventh Heaven. Much younger person, but still like kind of someone who's an iconic figure in dance culture. And then maybe the last image. Let me see the next one. Here's a beautiful photograph of Will. I don't know if in my mind's eye, I kind of see him like in the beautiful, dazzling atmosphere of the nightclub, that it has become such a part of his ideology, his culture, and the community that he was able to encourage others to build around him. You know, like people would create their own microclimates, so to speak, within the larger umbrella of these events, of Mustache, of Vaseline, etc. I remember Vaseline had like the bear den. You know, there was like an area at the club where the bear dudes would kind of hang out, and I would effectively call it the bear den. And so people kind of created their own spaces within the larger space of the event. So I don't think Will, we talk about Will because he's such an important figure, but I don't want to kind of give the wrong impression that it's all about him. In a way, he kind of unleashed something that then other people could kind of put their own energy and their own creativity and their own politics into it. And that's what creates the culture. So, and for me, this image kind of captures so much of that electrifying spirit. Sarah, is there anything else that you want to talk about before maybe we open it up to questions from viewers?
I think that you've given so many amazing insights into like all of the different tentacles of, you know, the world and work that kind of existed around Will. And I'm just looking, I can see that there's one quite excellent question in the Q&A field. And please, if you are watching and you have questions, just type them into the Q&A field, because we will endeavor to answer as many as we can. So Gled is asking, who else in the art/culture world could we call a modern day lesbro? It's such a good inclusion model for cis, gay or straight males to live by. What do you think, Lily?
Lesbros. See, I've only ever heard that term be used by Will, so I haven't heard that specific term. But I mean, if we can kind of expand it, yeah, I don't know. It's not really an idea of allyship, although maybe that's the vocabulary that we often use, is this kind of like
kind
allies.
Of collaboration. And I mean, Nathan from The Gossip, that somehow when I'm thinking back to, but I'm not sure what he's doing right now. But in terms of, you know, active artists in the community, it's a good question. I haven't thought of it as a term to apply to other people.
Yeah, I'd have to think about it. I think it's still maybe not such an active part of the larger community. I think it's still something that kind of holds more a promise than an actuality. I don't know. I'm sure there are many lesbros out there that I'm not familiar with, but the fact that I can't immediately think of other examples, I think suggests something.
Yeah, I mean, in Toronto, I feel like Kevin Heggie, who has always been kind of committed to a similar, you know, to feminist ideals and kind of punk culture and riot girl culture, and you know, is you know, certainly a longtime supporter of Fifth Column, who are kind of icons within this realm.
True. Yeah, and he made that documentary about Fifth Column. Yeah, that's a great example.
I think I feel like Kevin definitely qualifies if we're going to categorize people. And Amy Lee has updated me on Nathan's activity, so that's also helpful. Nathan from The Gossip is possibly making country music with his partner. Thank you, Amy.
Cool. So there's another question from Ryan. Can you give a bit more detail about the collaboration with the artist Will worked with and the imagery for the posters? How did the ideas come to be? I mean, it's so hard to recount because these are like, I don't know, like there's all the different events and it happened over so many years. So it's hard to kind of give one simple answer. But I mean, for Vaseline, once it really became like a big production, which happened very quickly, he did hand over the design and printing to Michael Comeau. So that's kind of a fairly simple answer, because most of the Vaseline posters were designed and printed by Michael Comeau, who's a great artist in his own right. You know, with Kevin Hagee, Will organize Miserable Mondays. And they always had these distinctive posters, these kind of two-color posters that alluded to the album cover art of like the Smiths records from the 80s. I don't know who would have designed and printed them. We'd have to ask Kevin like what his recollection is on that. For No TO, I'm pretty sure that Will was sole designer and printing all the No TO posters. That was very much kind of his baby. Yeah, Peroxide and No TO were pretty much Will's baby. So I would expect that he would have like designed and printed everything for those. For Mustache, it was kind of like him and I split the design and we both did the printing. And then like, you know, so it was one all-nighter for doing that. And then the following night would be another all-nighter to like wheat paste all the posters. So yeah, so always like a mix. So I don't think that there was like a strict rule. It was more like what best was able to make sure this kind of rolling production just was sustainable and like didn't kind of burn him out.
But also from very early on, Cecilia Berkovic was kind of the mastermind behind all of the digital design of the postcards and the business cards. And,
yeah. Oh, and she did so many
like
classic designs.
I know, like I think really one of the most capable people, like who made everything fall into place.
Yeah, so Cecilia Berkovic, that's right. So apart from the posters that Michael printed, she designed these little like business card, like flyers for each Vaseline. And they were like beautiful. Like all of them were like so funny, so pervy, so great. So yeah, many collaborators were working with Will on these different kind of posters and flyers that we have. So here's an anonymous question. Does anyone know about the Silence/Death Pink Floyd poster? So yeah, I wish we had an image of it, but we didn't select it. I think it was like a Silence Equals Death poster that he made, that he appropriated the Pink Floyd album cover of the light going into the triangle.
Yeah. And
then he added onto that the gay, so not the AIDS activism slogan of Silence Equals Death. So he superimposed the Pink Floyd design and Silence Equals Death to make this poster that this question is about. I don't know what the background around that is. For some weird reason, I seem to think he had made that poster for an exhibit. So probably like a group exhibit somewhere, maybe dealing with like AIDS issues. I'm not really sure. I don't remember for sure kind of what sparked, because it was not made for one of his music events. That was made as a kind of silkscreen printed art that existed in its own realm. Here we have another question, Matthew. In some of his art pieces, he references Egyptian motifs, icons, and art. Could you provide insight into where and why that came from for him? Sarah, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I mean, I know, and this was from a lot of the conversations I had with people who were very close to him and kind of involved in his care and his practice toward the end of his life. You know, as he was kind of confronting the fact that he was dying, I think he started to become more enamored of kind of Egyptian mythology and the idea of the ways in which, you know, different cultures conceive of death and this kind of Egyptian mysticism. And, you know, I remember, and again, many of you guys out there probably know much more about this than I do. So please jump in and post in the Q&A if I'm wrong. But from what I recall, you know, working on kind of the scarab beetle that I think was kind of painstakingly appliqued onto the back of a leather jacket, if I'm not mistaken, was one of the projects that he put a tremendous amount of effort in toward the end of his life. And it was very, very difficult, but there was something about it that I think was about connecting with these ideas of kind of life and death and what happens to us after we die. I'm pretty sure that there's a really good interview between Will and Leila Portabov in No More Potlucks,
No More Potlucks, yeah.
Where they talk at length about this. Like it's a brilliant, brilliant discussion. So I would suggest, Matthew, that you Google, you know what, I can see if I can call up the URL. But really, if you Google No More Potlucks, all one word, and Will Munro, it should come up, and it's a really great kind of look into that point in his life and kind of where his work was going.
Yeah, I don't know if people can still see my screen, but there's like one of these kind of Egyptian artworks in my virtual background. So yeah, so for the last 2 years of his life, Will was battling cancer. And it was a very aggressive cancer, and he managed to fight it for 2 long years. So it was a very intense period of time. And I think, you know, as Sarah, as you were saying, he was very interested in this idea, in thinking about Egyptian culture and the attitudes that ancient Egyptian culture had towards death, that it wasn't the end of the soul, but it was a new passage of the soul, and you have to kind of in life prepare for that. And so I think his last exhibition, where he used so many of the kind of tropes of ancient Egyptian culture, referred to this idea of preparing yourself for your own mortality. And so, you know, the scarab being this, the beetle that is able to use shit, like use dung to create these balls that become the beetle would bury its eggs inside. And so once the eggs hatched, the dung provided the nutrients for the newly hatched beetles. And so it became a symbol in Egyptian culture for the sun. So this amazing ability to transform shit into life and into the sun has a very profound spiritual significance in terms of our own mortality, like everybody's mortality. This idea of being able to, or even the idea of like the subversive nature of queer culture that we've been talking about. This ability to, through creation, take shit, that's the shit that you're given with in society, and be able to transform it into something beautiful and something alive, has a meaning that expands from Egyptian culture and connects to some of these things that we were talking about.
Yeah, this is a great quote from the interview that Leila did that many of you have very helpfully shared. He said, "Well said, I'm not really interested in Egyptology. I've never been to Egypt. I'm white and really have no connection to the culture, but having a terminal illness has forced me to think about death. The ideas around eternal life and general ways that death was viewed in ancient Egypt made me connect my culture to this imagery. I'm into the belief in eternal life after death and myths about people living their whole lives to die. I think about it in terms of remembering in ways that mark death not as the end of your life, but a kind of beginning. I've also always been interested in magic. I think magic is the closest thing to faith I've had. I'm really a believer and I look to it for power." So hopefully that kind of speaks to his connection to this iconography.
Are there any last questions before we end our conversation this evening? If you have it, just type it into the Q&A. Great. Well, Sarah, I think we've covered a lot of ground. I mean, this is like a very compressed conversation, but thanks for I don't know, taking this moment to like thinking about this imagery, thinking about these memories, thinking about Will and the culture that happened and how it connects with our lives today.
Oh, thank you, Louis. And again, I'm glad that we somehow spiritually connected and got our striped uniforms on so that we could.
That's right.
In front of stripes. Thank you all for being so, I truly, I'm so wigged out by Zoom events in general. And I feel like there's something very beautiful about the fact that I have a Q&A panel here with all of these people throwing out links for me and remembering, like validating my memory of white pants period. Like that's unreal. I really thought that I imagined that. So thank you. You guys have been really great. And it's been so nice to have such an engaged and participatory kind of community listening to this. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone for attending tonight.